Doesn't matter what the age of a person is, or whether they're in their basement, or whether they're in a mosque or somewhere else. When you are engaged in activities that explicitly promote or advocate terrorism, that is a serious criminal offense, no matter who you are. It will be a serious criminal offense. We cannot tolerate this.
It is going to target Muslims, it's going to do racial profiling, it's going to create a discrimination, it's going to put Muslims in a very bad position, because they will feel that this law is against us. And this is what I'm going to talk today. The isolation of Muslim community from mainstream Canadian society is one of the reasons of extremist recruitment thing. These kind of laws, these kind of statements, this kind of isolation is the first step to push this person in the hands of those religious people or community leaders who welcome them and prepare them for the recruitment.
Two Muslim organizations in Canada are demanding an apology from Prime Minister Stephen Harper for the comments that we just showed you that he made in Richmond Hill last week at the introduction of Bill C-51, Canada's new and updated anti-terrorism legislation. The Canadian National Council of Canadian Muslims and the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association issued a joint statement demanding an apology from the Prime Minister, specifically on his comments that he talked about, and I think it has to do specifically with it when he mentioned even if they're in a mosque or somewhere else. Okay, for more on this, I'm joined by Athar Khan. He's our Sun News contributor here. And also joining us and welcoming back to Straight Talk, Mohammed El Rashidi. He's the director of the Canadian Arab Federation. Thanks to both of you for being here. Let me start with you, Mohammed. Does the Prime Minister need to apologize?
The Prime Minister is not going to apologize, but I do find his comments regretful, and I think they're very dangerous. I think they vilify a segment of Canadian society unnecessarily, and when I ask myself what's the purpose of making these comments, I can't come up with the positive answers to that question.
What if the Prime Minister had said it doesn't matter what the age of a person is, or whether they're in a basement, or whether they're in a church or somewhere else? Would that have made the difference? Is the issue that he said mosque specifically?
Yeah, so we keep coming to this point. First of all, it doesn't matter what the age of the person is. That blows my mind. What are we going after babies now, or what's going on? So the statement is not very well crafted. I would hope that it was off the cuff and he didn't mean to say exactly those words. Age does matter. Now, but back to your point, I think let's be clear, Muslims are being vilified today. Muslims are targets, whether it be hate crimes at mosques or online or other things, as well as being killed by extremists and so on. So Muslims are in a bit of a different group in terms of as a community. So I would condemn absolutely if he was to single out any group, including people that go to churches or temples or synagogues. But I think in this case, Muslims especially are more vulnerable to a backlash, and so jumping on that is especially dangerous.
Athar, your take on that?
I think his remarks were absolutely innocuous and innocent, and I'm sad he didn't go far enough, because I think we need to put more pressure on the Muslim community, more pressure on mosques to reform what they say. Right? When I go into mosques, I've heard things in the past that most people would find absolutely abhorrent.
For example?
Right? For example, I've heard some people refer to Osama bin Laden as Sheikh Osama bin Laden. I've heard imams refer to people who are fighting overseas as fighting for us, Muslims. I've heard people justify all aspects of Sharia law that are absolutely barbaric in the 21st century and always have been. And so to say that we shouldn't, and he didn't say all Muslims, he didn't say all mosques, he was making an innocuous reply, straightforward reply to a clear question. And so that I find extremely problematic, that some people are going to try to take this and say he went too far just because he mentioned mosques, as if this has nothing to do with Muslims or mosques.
Mohammed, let me ask you, and I'll have you respond, but let me ask you this first. Are there mosques in this country, in your view, that do perpetuate a ideology of Sharia and an extreme interpretation of Islam? Are there in this country?
Okay. So very interesting discourse here, because last time I was here we talked about freedom of speech. Well, what you're saying is you want to limit freedom of speech in mosques.
No, I'm asking you the question is, in your opinion, is there a perpetuation of an extreme interpretation of Islam in Canadian mosques. Do you have that experience?
Look, I find extreme points of views being spewed out everywhere, whether it be news channels.
But your example, you're here representing the Canadian Arab Federation. I assume you go to a mosque.
Right.
I assume you've gone to mosques across this country. What I'm asking you is
Right.
if there are some clerics that do perhaps preach something against infidels, you know, and the like. Is that happening?
Okay, so this is a very big discussion. I hope you give me a chance to address it. First of all, whether someone says something I disagree with or not does not in any way rise to the level of a crime, let alone terrorism. And this is what I find troubling here. Yes, I hear things in mosques I disagree with,
right.
just like I hear things on television I disagree with. But that does not make it promoting anything. That is simply someone's point of view. So you say you went to a mosque, you heard things you didn't like. Did you go carry out a terrorist attack? No. And so when someone is trying to link terrorism with what is being said in a mosque, you need to have facts to make such a dangerous connection. No, I got to finish.
Hang on, let's give Mohammed a
When the
minute here.
Prime Minister of Canada refers to mosques promoting terrorism, what is he referring to exactly? I'd like to know the time, the location, where is this happening, and where did it lead to a terrorist attack?
Well, perhaps you can help him with that information, because you just said that you heard things in a mosque that you don't necessarily agree with.
I hear more things.
Like, but is it preaching or is
I hear
it
more things I disagree with on Sun News than I hear in any mosque.
No, but you're hearing me. All right, so hang on a second. We have to take a short break, but Mohammed and Attar are going to stay with me. We will continue this discussion. Stay with us. Two Muslim organizations in Canada demanding an apology from Prime Minister Stephen Harper in light of his comments made last week in Richmond Hill when introducing Bill C-51, Canada's new anti-terrorism legislation, and debating whether or not the Prime Minister needs to apologize. Attar Khan, our Sun News contributor, and Mohammed El-Rashidi is a director of the Canadian Arab Federation, are both here to discuss this. All right, we just heard from Mohammed. I want you to have a chance to respond to what he was just saying.
Yeah, no, I think there is a connection between what someone says and what someone does. Right now, of course, everything that every person who hears an imam say something radical or fundamentalist isn't going to carry that out. But there are some people that are going to carry it out. And hold on, let me just finish.
Let him make his point, then you can come in.
Now, some people say that this has nothing to do with mosques, it has to do with the internet, the preachers that are on the internet. But guess where those preachers are that are on the internet? Those preachers who have videos on YouTube, they're preaching from a mosque pulpit. In other words, people are listening to that in a mosque as well as on the internet. So this idea that mosques have nothing to do with people who get radicalized just makes no sense.
Do you think, okay, go ahead, Mohammed.
Well, okay, first of all, Canadian Arab Federation is a secular organization. Majority of the presidents of the Canadian Arab Federation since 1967.
So you don't believe in Sharia law?
No, hold on, have been Christian. So I want to make that clear, but this isn't about religious or secular or anything like that. This is about distorting reality, okay? Whatever you disagree with that is said in a place of worship has no bearing on a criminal act that someone carries out on the outside. And if you're going to make that nexus, if you're going to say, this guy is doing this because an imam made him do it, you need to support that with facts. I know in the media you guys don't need to, but I certainly do in a court of law. So you gotta, and when a prime minister takes that step, that's where I have a real problem. That's where the lights start flashing. What are you talking about? Did Babino go to a mosque and have someone tell him go into parliament and do this? Then we were talking about, but if you don't have that evidence, you certainly don't have a shred of evidence, you can't make that connection. And so the narrative keeps changing.
We're not taking an imam and saying, let's put him in court and let's indict him. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's a connection between what someone says and what someone does. And the thousands of people that are going over to ISIS to join them and other radical groups, where do you think they heard this from? From their own mind? They just made it up? Some ghost told them to do it?
I will tell you where this comes from. This is a political reality.
So it has nothing to do with Islam?
No, it has to do with people.
First of all, it has nothing to do with Sharia.
I'm not talking about battles.
It has nothing to do with Hadith.
I'm talking about the reaction.
It has nothing to do with the Quran.
No, it has to do with war.
Wait, hold it.
There are wars going on.
ISIS stones women. You can find that in the Quran and Hadith. ISIS.
What is that?
ISIS. There's a connection between religion and what they're doing.
Okay.
ISIS kills gay people, throws them off roofs. You can find that in the Hadith. You can find that from scholar statements. So how can you say there's no connection between religion and what ISIS is doing?
Because ISIS did not exist before the Iraq invasion of.
What about Al Qaeda?
Hold on, I gotta finish. ISIS did not exist before the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003, which the same
What about Al-Qaeda?
hold on, which the same prime minister supported on false grounds. Had you not removed Saddam Hussein, you would not have taken the genie out of the bottle. You cannot create these monsters
the assumption is that,
and then start blaming religion.
The assumption is that the Iraq war created ISIS, and that we were so
Hold on,
horrible.
was ISIS
did you hear about ISIS
just
5 years ago? Just give me 1 second.
You know
let me just finish. I'm going to explain to you something very pertinent. So the assumption is that Iraq war created ISIS. Least do people like this understand that Christopher Hitchens, one of the foremost criticizers of American foreign policy, came out in favor of the Iraq war. Why? Because he said they removed a brutal dictator that was absolutely brutalizing their people. And if anybody cares about Muslims, they will be saying the first person that had to go from there was Saddam Hussein.
Is that the correlation you're making, Mohammed? Is that ISIS didn't exist before the invasion of Iraq and the fall of Saddam Hussein?
What I'm saying is it is ludicrous to bring a 1,400-year-old text and blame it for political realities today that are directly connected
Even
to
if they're citing
wars.
those texts.
To wars
They're
and
citing
mass
those
slaughter.
texts.
Well, hold on. Why didn't they cite the text 150 years ago? Why is it only now? Let me give you an example.
What
Okay,
does that have to do with
I mean,
it?
I can't believe
You're the one
you're
that just
quoting
said
Richard Hitchens.
Okay. No, it's Christopher Hitchens.
Okay, let's go with Professor Robert Pape, University of Chicago.
Oh,
study
here we
on,
go, that
no,
study.
Suicide. What do you mean that study? It's facts. I know it bothers conservatives to bring up numbers, but let's stick to them.
No, I
okay?
don't think it's. But I don't think this is a conservative,
suicide
liberal,
bombing.
or left-wing,
I
right?
don't
This is not
believe
a
in-
nonpartisan
it's
issue.
related.
Let me tell you what Robert
Hold
Pape
on.
said.
No,
Guys, hang on.
No, I got to finish
He's got
this point.
20 seconds to finish his point, and then after
Let me finish my point. Suicide bombing, which I would say is one of the hallmarks today in our view of what we define as a terrorist act. Iraq, viewed as of the cradle of civilization, has had 0 suicide bombings in its entire history, up to and until March of 2003, the Iraq invasion. How many has Iraq had in terms of suicide bombings since? What does that have to do with? Iraq has been Muslim for over 1,000 years. How come
you mentioned
so what's going on? How many stonings happened in Iraq before the U.S. invasion?
30 seconds.
So you mentioned Robert Pape. So the argument that people like this often use is they bring up Robert Pape and a couple other people that talk like this and say that that it's all political, has nothing to do with the religion. Okay, that's problematic because you take out the religious part of it. And I met a woman yesterday who is Somalian from Saudi Arabia who said that cutting off heads is justified, stoning people is justified, and all these things are justified. Why? Because it's in the Quran and the Hadith. And there's no connection?
No, absolutely. Listen, people cut heads in wars all the time. Why are you coming to a specific point and saying, look,
they're citing that.
Gentlemen, we are not going to resolve this here, but I appreciate the passion on both sides and thank both of you for joining me. Azhar Khan and Mohammed El Rashidi. Great discussion. You can log on to sunnewsnetwork.ca and you can revisit this if you so choose.